Hey, Drew, so a bunch of schools out there are announcing reduced capacity. I'm sure you've heard. But the big question that I have of all these reduced capacity conversations, why is Georgia Tech announcing that at all?
That's a really good question because I don't know if you've ever been to Grant Field, but the limitations from the 1920s still are in force today. It still looks like Cumberland is taking on Georgia Tech, and there are only 10,000 people in the stands, and it's 2019 at Grant Field.
You know, Early, sometimes them football boosters will provide your family with a car or even house if you keep nice and quiet about it. They're gonna do what now?
Welcome to the place where if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying is a way of life.
Just keep it down home, cuz.
Where degenerate gamblers can congregate in peace.
Money, yeah. Money, yeah.
Where screaming at 20-year-old kids on TV is just another Saturday.
Every fiber in your bone, and you take it and you beat the piss out of them. I'm talking about beat the piss out of them. Let's go whip their ass. Let's go.
Where game days don't end until the Rainbow Warriors say so.
It hits the upright. Oh my God! It hits the left upright. It hits the left upright.
They are the bagmen that Danny Sheridan never found.
I went to him with a strong-ass offer.
And it all comes to you with a splash of bourbon on the side. Woo! This is the Friends of the Program podcast.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome into Friends of the Program, episode number 2, or as our good friend Big Dave would say, episode dose. Good to see you out there, buddy.
Dose.
I'm Brad. He's Drew. We're back for another week. So glad to have you along again. Thanks for tuning in to week 1. If you're just now catching us here for week number 2, we're a show that likes to talk bourbon. We like to talk college sports and all kinds of other randomness as well. You'll catch on as we go. Today we've got an amazing guest for you. He's Barry McKnight. He's the voice of the Troy Trojans. We're going to get into him in just a minute. We're going to talk Group of 5 football, a little Sun Belt, and how some of these new rule changes with the NCAA have affected those smaller schools as well. But before we get into all that, Drew, I know first, one other thing too, before we actually get into all that, make sure you follow us on Twitter, FOT Podcast. That's at FOT Podcast. We link out to all of our available ways of watching us. You can also find us on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We're on iTunes. So check us out all those places. But again, Twitter, one of the main places to find us at FOT Podcast. And I think our Instagram has the same handle as well.
Yes, it
Drew,
does.
Let's get started with week number 2. Question number 1, as always, between you and I. What's on the menu for the drink today?
Well, the drink has been poured. I had 2 pieces of ice in there just to give it a nice little chill on this okay outside. I don't know if you know this, but the temperature's starting to kind of come down.
We actually got rain here in Texas today. It was amazing.
Oh, my gosh.
I haven't seen it in a month and a half.
And it's not from a tropical storm like it's going to be next week or anything. It's amazing. But in my glass today is the Poor Man's Pappy, otherwise known as Noah's Mill. It is handmade from the hills of Kentucky in Bardstown, Kentucky. Fantastic bottle that I've had since the holiday season this past year, and finally putting the nail in the coffin of it today. Really, really nice. What about you? What have you got?
We're talking a lot of Southern football today with a guest in the Sun Belt, and I know we're going to talk SEC schedule later, so I went through Southern. I got Crystal Ridge Salted Caramel Moonshine from Hot Springs, Arkansas, sitting here in my hand. Folks, this is delicious, by the way. It's legal. It's not. I have the illegal stuff somewhere around here too, but this is the legal stuff. Put it on a vanilla ice cream with some chocolate sauce. Yeah, it's pretty special. So it's dessert drinking.
Luckily, we were actually together when you got that bottle, and my wife is even a fan of the salted caramel. And if I can get her away from gin, anything other than gin or rum or tequila, it's going to be something salted caramel, and she absolutely loves it. So shout out to the Crystal Ridge folks.
Yeah, definitely. So, Drew, ton of news this week, obviously, with NCAA making some rule changes, coming out and saying there's going to be an extra year of eligibility. I know us and Barry are going to get into that here in just a minute, but initial thoughts on really how that's going to affect football moving forward.
I'm interested to see what comes out after this, because this was just the first hurdle. There has to be more legislation and direction down the road. You're starting to see a lot of players, like we talked about last week, with some of the players wanting to reclassify, with states like Virginia not playing football at all, with other high school programs just calling off the season altogether. And kids wanting to go out there and play. So they're trying to latch onto these schools who have an 84, 85. I know Ole Miss is actually at a point where they could take about 6 players if they wanted to reclassify this year. But in that same vein, you're also talking about your 85 being capped and extended for an extra year for players that aren't going to go to the draft, or maybe do want to play one more year, since this is kind of a make-believe year in the NCAA's.
It's really a free year for eligibility. Nothing I've ever seen. Also, don't forget, if you play 4 games or less, you can hold the red shirt too still. So there's
Exactly.
a whole other actually potential of 2 years for some of these guys to be able to play.
You could, feasibly, if you really milked it out, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you milk it out, have your guys play this year, redshirt them next year, use them in 4 games, and then you got another year of eligibility. Absolutely. And I mean, I know that you and I in the past have joked about, the Wayne Madkin. He's been here forever. Literally, we're at or the Trey Smith from Auburn from the early to mid 2000s.
I always felt that game away with Chucky Mullins up at Utah State. Like, that dude was always playing.
Yeah. No, you're now looking at a situation where if you are a true junior, this year doesn't count. You could redshirt next year. God forbid you tear your ACL. You're now there for 8 years as a junior at the same program, without transfers, without anything else really weird going on. So there has to be a little bit more direction from the NCAA oversight committee on those kind of numbers, and we'll get into more of that later on.
It's wild, like what could do, how schools are going to manipulate it. I really think you're going to see guys play this year for free, basically, and then take some red shirts to help offset the numbers over the years. You're going to see purging from programs, guys who are kind of like, hey, we may not really need you anymore, and that's where those smaller schools or maybe the middling programs are going to be helped out down the road. I don't think, I know the NCAA's intentions are good here initially, but I don't think the long-term consequences have been thought out.
This is somewhat of the same situation that we saw in baseball. You and I are huge baseball guys. You can see Ted Williams over my shoulder, but we're big college baseball guys. This is a lot like we only played 14 or 17 games this season, so it's just a wash. If you can play and latch on with a team or stay at your school, that's fine. If you want to transfer, that's fine too. Connor Davis with Auburn going out to Arizona State, and a couple of other guys have found new homes through the transfer portal. But in that same vein, there was no extension to roster limits in college baseball. And I think that they're going to try to do that the same way in football. However, I don't know what that does to recruiting because some schools already have 10, 12, 14 players committed. I mean, you might not have that space now come December and January and February.
Yeah, this ruling right now is only for fall sports. So what if the Big Ten decides to play in the spring or the Pac-12 decides to play in the spring? Do they get the same leeway?
That's actually a really good point that I hadn't thought about. That's a very good point.
It seems so disjointed. And then go back to the Big Ten conversation we had last week with Chris Solari and families protesting now outside of the Big Ten because they can't get clear information. You and I have talked about it before, just in conversation between the two of us, but we really think, and yeah, we're SEC guys, we're SEC homers, we're flat admitted that, right?
Sure.
But the delayed response the SEC has taken and just kind of the wait and see approach seems to be the smarter approach at this point. I'm not saying the SEC is not going to cancel at any point, but they've kind of avoided that backlash from the families and from players so far.
Well, here, I think, and living, I know you live in Austin, Texas, which is the South as well.
Yes.
I'm more south-ish. Yeah,
I don't really consider.
it's
Sorry,
sort of.
Texas folks. I don't consider Texas the South.
Well, yeah, it's
its own place. It's its own place.
It's its own thing. But living in the South and talking to SEC fans, Tennessee fans, Vanderbilt fans, Alabama fans about where we are as a football family community, they have all said, I don't understand what the Big Ten was thinking or doing in the rushing to make a decision. However, I know that Commissioner Sankey and the SEC office is going to do everything that they can. And if they have to pull the plug the Friday on the 19th or even on that Monday or Tuesday, because after that, that's pretty much the drop dead, no pun intended, North Carolina, to when you can pull the plug, that they're going to feel like they actually did everything that they could to try to have a season. And if it needs to be, if the plug has to be pulled, so be it. Obviously, it's for the health and safety of the student athletes first and foremost, or the players, or the athletes, whichever one you want to call it at this point. Especially with the
only people
situation
on campus,
Exactly. But I know that every person that I've talked to that's an SEC fan, first and foremost, identifies with a school, has said, I have the feeling that the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12 are doing everything that they can to make sure it happens, and I can't fault them if there's just no way.
Yeah, it's really going to be interesting to watch. But the thing that, as we shift over to this interview with Barry McKnight, that you and I have both talked about, and we talked with Barry a little bit about it here, the exposure and the opportunity for some of these smaller schools coming up, it's pretty amazing. You texted me this week and said, we're a week away from actual live football. And I'm, wait, excuse me? But there's a FCS game playing
correct
literally at a stadium I could have walked to from my home, like from the place I grew up in Montgomery. For the first 15 years of my life, I could have walked to the stadium at Crampton Bowl. Who was it? Central Arkansas and Austin P. Is that right?
You're absolutely correct. The defending OVC champion, Austin P. Govs.
Yeah, and Central Arkansas made the playoff last year. They were for the FCS football in the Southland Conference. They're a good football team. So if you want to see FCS football next week, it's something to watch. Should be pretty entertaining.
It's a bunch of people hitting each other with a football in the middle. I'm going to watch it. There's just no other way to say it.
But the week after that, you've got, I think, a 7-game slate right now. And it's pretty much all Sun Belt. I think there's a little Conference USA sprinkled in, but for me, the headliner is actually just down the road. SMU and Texas State going to go
absolutely
here in the state.
Absolutely,
that's a great early week game. But Labor Day weekend, we sort of traditionally think about that big kickoff game where it was going to be Bama and USC this year. Last year, it was Auburn and Oregon, right? The game that came down to the very last second. Oh God, thank God we threw that touchdown because I couldn't cover. Sorry, I had a 4-team parlay on that one, and that's the only game I needed at the end of the night to cover the 4-team parlay, and I was about to be so mad if Auburn kicked a field goal to win. I
was about to say, don't misunderstand. He would have been happy that Auburn had won, but he would have walked out of that stadium pissed.
I would have been
Auburn won by 2. Right,
sidebar.
3.
I literally was sitting there next to my stepdad and my mom came in to watch the game with me, and I was sitting next to a good friend of mine too. And I'm lamenting the fact that we're driving down the field to kick a game-winning field goal while I'm in the stadium.
In typical Auburn style, kick a field goal at the very end to win it.
The moment the touchdown happens, my first words went, "Yay, we won!" It was, "We bleeping covered."
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
And trust us, folks. As we get into the season, we'll be talking lines and gambling a lot more because we like to do that a little bit. But yeah, first we have a chance to start our degenerate gambling Labor Day weekend because you've got about 6 or 7 football games happening that weekend. You got the Kentucky Derby happening that day on Labor Day weekend, which hopefully we'll have somebody to talk on that next week with us a little bit. That's what we're hoping for. But it should be, if you like to drink, you just want to sit around and lay a few bucks down, Labor Day weekend's where it's at this year.
And the other fun part about that for me is if you do have discretionary money, which, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people that don't at this point. But if you have $20 that you don't mind putting on a game that you don't care about, or $5 here and there, I think I'm going to. I'm already looking at a couple of parlays with about 3 or 4 teams that. I really like that Troy ULM game.
Yeah, I think that's it. Now, ULM had to stop practicing this week.
Exactly.
Because of COVID restrictions. They actually had an outbreak on their team. So how is that going to affect their preparation?
And that's going to be the fun part of this season. And by fun, I don't mean, yay, who's sick now? But that's going to be the
like a Robitussin.
Yeah, here's a Robitussin and some Vicks Vapo Rub. Just put it on. It's fun. It's going to be the interesting thing, because what do schools do, especially with these rapid response or rapid result tests that are now coming out with the saliva test? How do these schools use that information? When do they set the player down? If there is a rapid test that comes back on Friday or Saturday just before the game, do we do another one? Is he out for a quarter until we get a negative test? It's just per each team, I guess. But it's going to be interesting to see how these teams do this as we lead up to kickoff.
Well, let's get a little deeper into how COVID-19 is affecting a team directly. Let's talk a little bit of Sunbelt football in Group of 5 at that. And, this could be the year that a Group of 5 really has a chance at the college football playoff. And we'll get into all that here right now with our guest, Barry McKnight. He's the voice of the Troy Trojans. We'll step aside for just a second for the intermission. Let's hear him. Then we'll come back with our thoughts, and we'll talk a little SEC schedule that dropped this week as well. Well, it is interview time once again here on the Friends of the Program podcast. And this week, the Bagmen, well, we didn't have to go too far. Back to my home stomping grounds to find our guest as we go back to Central Alabama. And this week, we bring in the play-by-play voice of the Troy Trojans, one Mr. Barry McKnight. Barry, welcome into the Friends of the Program podcast.
It's great to visit with you. We were dropping names before. It seems like the whole broadcast world is 6 degrees of Brad Tillery. It's funny.
Yeah, I was telling Barry, I actually grew up listening to his morning show with John Longshore in Montgomery when I was a kid, and I've met him a few times, and it's certainly kind of a small world.
Yeah, I don't even take offense to saying that you used to listen to it when you were a kid, because, Brad, we've been doing it 23 years now together, our own little show and our own little corner of Montgomery, Alabama. So it's funny how in this business, the years creep by. 23 years at Sports Radio 740 in Montgomery with John Longshore, and now about to start my 19th year. Drew, do you believe it?
Wow.
At Troy University.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I actually still remember when you got the job at Troy and how excited everybody was in Central Alabama that you got the broadcast gig at Troy. So amazing that you've been there so long. But Troy football has come a long way since you took that job.
It's been interesting to be a part of it. I remember whenever the first press conference came to announce my hiring, I mentioned then that it felt like I was stepping onto a rising elevator. And, at the time, the stadium had 17,500 seats. I had done a couple of years of television for Troy before the radio job opened up. Troy was in the Southland Football League with Sam Houston State and with what then was Southwest Texas State and some of the schools from Alabama. And, to be able to say 19 years later that I've called wins over LSU, Troy wins over Nebraska, wins over Mississippi State and wins over Missouri. When I first stepped into that, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to say that, but it has been a great ride, and it has changed quite a bit. You're correct.
So, Barry, we want to talk Group of 5 football with you here, especially how the COVID-19 is impacting things. one of the first things I got to ask is, with the pandemic this year, everybody's scrambling to play. So many conferences deciding not to play. The Sun Belt going to play. The American Athletic going to play. Conference USA is going to play for sure. What was the scramble like for you guys to go fill a schedule out? Because Troy just announced you're going to play a full 12-game slate this year.
There's not many schools that right now are. We're scheduled to play 12. We anticipate playing 12, but the real indicator of all of this is going to be the virus itself. How many we play, whether we play on schedule, how many people are going to be healthy to play. Nobody really knows all of that. So with all of the unknown, you kind of just venture out and take your best guess. Brent Jones, our athletic director here at Troy, he's just in his second year, but he's been in the business for so long. He knows everybody in here. I was talking with him earlier today, just before the schedule was announced. And he's had a big whiteboard in his office, and it's almost like a beautiful mind. He's putting up combinations and arrows here and there. He told me that they have had at some stage of development 196 different prospective schedules.
Oh wow!
That he was working on, and there's only 70 something teams even out there. And we're talking about the times. The dates. We're talking about who's available. There were some schools that Troy was on the verge of getting on the schedule, and their conferences are not going to play football this fall. Or other schools that we thought that were out of the mix, that all of a sudden something came open, like with BYU and like with Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee. Troy plays them twice this year. They're old conference rivals, but, they haven't been in the same conference for 5 years. Middle Tennessee lost a game against Duke. They lost an opportunity against Virginia Tech. If those hadn't happened, we would not have been able to play Middle Tennessee once, much less twice. So there's just a ton of variables, a ton of moving parts. The one focus more than anything else was to try to get to 12 games. And people will be, people will be jaded about it and say, well, it's all just a money grab. You're just trying to get as much money as you can. But it really, Brent put it well today. He said our number one thing was we thought our student athletes deserved it. My office in the Troy Athletic Department is in the field house, which is right off of our practice fields. And they've been practicing. Until today, we didn't know who to prepare for. We didn't know what the first game was going to be. We didn't know how many games there were going to be. But everybody sort of trusted the process and trusted the work that was being done. And it's going to look different. It's going to be strange from my vantage point for sure. And I imagine it's absolutely going to be strange from the players' standpoint. Financially, it's not a good situation, but it could have been a really, really bad situation. So finances didn't necessarily drive it. Sure, they played a factor in it, but I really believe that the main idea was to give the student athletes, to give the football players a schedule because they deserved it as much as anything else.
I like what you were saying, Barry, about when you brought up Middle Tennessee State and how that kind of came about. You actually open up the season at Veterans playing ULM, and then you go on the road to Middle Tennessee State. And then comes that big matchup with BYU for a home and then away and then a return home game back to Troy. I got to meet you during the Larry Blakeney days of getting Oklahoma State and Missouri and all those teams to come to Troy. What does it mean for a program like Troy to get even a BYU to come to Troy, Alabama, and play in front of the home crowd?
It's going to be great. The home and home aspect of it was going to be a deal breaker. If they did not agree to come to Troy, Troy would not have played the game at BYU. And to be honest, it's a buyer's market for us as far as BYU goes, because BYU at the time, I don't know what they've done subsequently, but BYU had 4 games. They had 8 games canceled, and they're the only school west of where you are, Brad, that's even playing college football right now. Yeah. So it's not as though they can, look for some 1AAs out there or look for a non-conference game nearby. So we knew that we had some leverage, for lack of a better phrase, in the negotiations. And that leverage, it didn't get us any more money necessarily, but it did get us a return trip in 2026. And if that had not happened, I assure you, would have gone somewhere else and looked at some other combination.
How does this year stack up for Group of Five schools like yourself and others that we've mentioned from around the country for exposure? Because I just looked at Labor Day weekend, traditionally big weekend for kickoff games. Alabama was going to play USC this year that weekend. I think Georgia had a game scheduled out of conference that was going to be very big. Few others. And now there's only about 6 games that weekend, several of them featuring Sun Belt teams, including yourself, and that's it.
If you look at the schedule, if you just look at a calendar, the Southeastern Conference doesn't play week 1, week 2, week 3. Their first game is on the 26th. So it's another buyer's market, fellas. ESPN, all of the major players, they are crying out for programming. They've been pleading for sports programming for months now. And especially college football. The financials of it is, college football actually, as far as programming goes, is fairly cheap to produce. They make a ton of money off of it, but they don't have any of it. So, if you look at it, for instance, from Troy's point of view, or really from the Sun Belt Conference, Troy's conference's point of view, an opportunity to play a conference game to open up against ULM, which Troy hasn't done in 5 or 6 years, to play it at home and to be able to, again, there's that word, leverage, a chance to get on ESPN or ESPN2 for that game. That doesn't happen in a normal set of circumstances. There's going to be opportunities in week 2. Troy goes to Middle Tennessee in week 3, and then BYU. So the BYU game is going to be the opening game of SEC schedules, and Troy will already have had a couple of games and a bye week beforehand. So, the way it is in the Sun Belt Conference, everybody looks at those first 3 weeks as, hey, let's make our best deal. Let's find what we can find and get as much exposure as we can before everybody else is added into the mix.
Yeah, I'm a 45-minute drive from Texas State, and Texas State plays SMU first week of the season.
In San Marcos.
In San Marcos. And I'm like, wait, there's tickets available? I'm thinking about heading there.
Well, and see, that's the other variable about it. Nobody in our league is going to have enough tickets. You're not going to make your money off of ticket sales this year. You basically, what you're going to do is you're going to try to soften the losses financially, because I think Troy's going to have 20%. Texas State may not have any. So games like that, normally those are great ticket games. In this situation, you're not. These are, other than the aspect of the student athletes and the radio networks, this is, if you want to boil it down for the vast majority of the sporting public, this is television programming, pure and simple. And they need it. They're thirsting after it. And the Sun Belt Conference is stepping right into the void with a really good product and saying, here we are, take a look at us. And if you take a look at Troy football, going to be really good this year, fellas. If you take a look at at Appalachian State out of our league, or Louisiana out of our league, if you just take a look on a national scale, Arkansas State's another great example. That's good football. People may not necessarily give the Sun Belt that much of a chance as far as viewership with other games going on, but if they take a look, they're going to say, there are some really good players. Carlton Marshall for Troy is an All-American linebacker. You got guys for Appalachian State, not every one of them, but you got guys who can start at Power 5 programs all over the country. Louisiana has one of the hottest young coaches in the country in Billy Napier. You'll get a chance to see those guys where, again, in a perfect world, maybe the exposure wouldn't be anywhere close to what it's going to be for the first 3 weeks.
And Barry, you actually lead me down my next path. I was going to bring up everybody knows about the SEC West Division and how tough it is in that division. Here's a big spoiler for everybody that doesn't follow Sun Belt football. The Sun Belt East could be that next step, just like 1 and 1A from the toughest divisions in college football, just from a population standpoint, because you have Troy, you have Appalachian State, which I know that they're going to be breaking in a brand new coach with Eli Drinkwitz going to Missouri. However, they're still App State. Georgia Southern is always a power, although they've been kind of figuring their way out after the switch from the FCS ranks. Break down for us, if you would, a little bit more about the Sun Belt and how things are going to break out. I know Georgia State just had a player go out with a heart problem, which was found out due to this COVID testing that everybody's been doing. And that just came out here recently, later in the week. But could you just break down exactly what we should be looking for the fan that doesn't know the Sun Belt?
Well, for Troy, and I've been blessed with this. Troy entered the league in 2006. Troy, starting in 2007, won 5 straight Sun Belt Conference championships. Overall, we've won 6. We won it 2 years ago with Neil Brown, and again, I think we're going to be really good this year. There were times when we first entered the league that we knew, as a coaching staff, as staff, and as players, that you could go to some of these places and you did not have to play your best football to win. You could get by with a lot of mistakes against some of the teams as the Sun Belt was constituted then. I promise you can't do that now. You go to Appalachian State, and Troy goes to Appalachian State to end the year. You don't play well, you're gonna get boat raced.
Rocked at the rock.
Yeah,
you might be in the snow too.
Well, it's the stadium is right up there on the mountaintop. It's a beautiful venue,
stadium.
but I am not a cold weather fan, and they use that for their advantage. Man, it is freezing up there. They don't mind letting you know that it's 5,555 feet above sea level. So, they try to play into it, but that's a great program. I mean, they won 12 games last year. Troy 2 years ago went 11-2 and beat LSU at LSU. These are programs that are legitimate programs. 3 years ago, Troy was ranked in the top 25 in the country. Georgia Southern, with their rush attack, particularly if you play them at home, and Troy has to go there this year. They can take the football away from you, and you never see it. So not only is the league better at the very top, but as they say, a rising tide floats all boats. Georgia State now plays in the old Turner Field, and they have refurbished
beat Tennessee last year. I think people forget that.
Mm-hmm. They beat Tennessee, and it was not a fluke. It was not a last-second Hail Mary or anything like that.
They beat them up and down the field for 60 minutes.
Yeah, and and Tennessee righted the ship and was much better later on in the year. So timing was a little part of it, but I mean, that's a legitimate program. In the West, you've got Louisiana. They've got 3 running backs who are all game breakers. I love their running attack, but also in the West, you've got Arkansas State, which has won the league 5 times. There's just no easy outs in the Sun Belt Conference anymore. It still comes through, what I consider the big 2. That's Appalachian State and Troy, with Arkansas State just a hair behind in the West. It is a little bit top-heavy in the Eastern Division, but all in all the way around there, Chip Lindsey and everybody here at Troy knows that every week you better be ready to play. It wasn't always that case in the Sun Belt.
So not a Sun Belt specific question, but more, again, a kind of a group of 5 question for you. With the NCAA coming out and saying anybody who plays fall sports this year is not going to lose a year of eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect Group of 5 schools moving forward? Scholarship count, or maybe getting players from bigger programs that are looking for places to play as new recruits come in?
The recruits is one thing I was going to bring up whenever I first heard that was a possibility. Talking about recruiting, what does it do for your numbers? You can bring in 25, you can only have 85 on scholarship. Well, what if you have a group of 6th-year seniors that you were planning on replacing with your incoming crop? They're going to have to do something with the numbers on that. I honestly don't know how that's going to work. I don't know how it's going to be addressed. But for instance, Troy has got an interesting test case, I think. I haven't spoken to him. I haven't even really thought about this because this really broke over the last day or two. But Troy has got a running back named B.J. Smith. who 2 years ago ran for 1,000 yards. Last year, he was the preseason Sun Belt Offensive Player of the Year, and he got hurt after 2 games. Took a red shirt, and he's back this year, and he's healthy, and he's a spectacular running back. If he plays this year, does really, really well, he could come back next year now, potentially. Play 6 years. He's a little bit short, maybe to be a prototypical draft choice at running back. He can do a lot of really good things, but if I try to empathize and put myself into his position, and he's a great team guy, loves the game of football, why not? I mean, get your master's degree, finish up your master's degree on the university's dime, get to play football one more year before you have to join the real world. I imagine there is a ton of people like B.J. Smith who are looking at that and thinking, I'm a fifth-year guy. I could go 6 years, play football, eat at the training table, be on scholarship, check out the girls in the bathing suits in the spring, and you guys you were in college,
I almost went to Troy on the basis of they had a 9-hole golf course in the middle of campus. So I'm just saying.
Well, you got to, there's people, and I'm one of them who, I see people who graduate from college in like 2.5 or 3 years. What's your hurry?
Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's like Thornton Mellon in Back to School. Don't go. Stay
stay
here.
Stay. Barry, you brought it up, and my final question for you is it brings you back more to home. Chip Lindsey's in his second year as head coach of the Troy Trojans. Ryan Pugh is also in his second year as your offensive coordinator. Defense coordinator also in his second season. What is that cohesiveness going to do for the Trojans as they get ready to kick off a season that we've never, ever seen and hopefully will never, ever see again?
Well, it eliminates some questions. This has been an off-season of questions. I've never seen anything like that, and we've already addressed it. How is the season going to go? Don't know. How many people are going to be available and healthy every week? Don't know. What about the opposition? Will they be healthy? What will we have to do in order to safeguard our health while we're at the game or competing or broadcasting the game? We don't know. About Chip Lindsey. About Ryan Pugh. Brandon Hall's coming back. The whole coaching staff is coming back. So in this off season of questions, it is good to have some stability there. Especially guys like Chip and Brandon and Ryan, since you mentioned them by name, because they've worked together before. Chip was at Auburn when Pugh was a quality control guy. Same thing with Brandon Hall. Ryan last year as offensive coordinator and offensive line coach really did a good job. He's a name I suggest to your viewers and your listeners to mark down because he's up and coming. You'll hear from Ryan Pugh in the future. But, the players specifically, they don't know what's going to happen next. They weren't sure they were going to have a football season. They didn't know what the football season was going to look like. So to be able to have something constant, something consistent, I should say, and something stable in terms of the coaching staff and in terms of, the workouts and the structure and everything that they've become used to under Chip Lindsey, that's bound to be a bonus just in and of the fact that with everything else going on, at least they know what's expected of them from the coaching staff on the football field.
All right, 2 questions, Barry. We'll get you out of here. First, is this the best shot the Group of 5 has of getting into the playoff?
It is, just simply because of numbers, and on my radio show, we question the legitimacy of a true college football playoff. We're questioning the legitimacy of everything, a Heisman Trophy winner, any of that stuff. But in terms of numbers, sure, there's not as many teams competing. The committee members, the College Football Playoff Committee members, normally don't spend a great deal of time in front of the television looking at the Sun Belt Conference. You've already mentioned the first 3 weeks, they'll get a really good look at the Sun Belt Conference. It's up to the Sun Belt Conference to give them something to admire, something to impress them, but there is that opportunity as well. The idea that the Group of 5 is an absolutely separate entity is not necessarily true. A Group of 5 member gets into the bowl rotation every year anyway. The real key is, number one, to recognize the opportunity that's there. This type of opportunity, this quality of an opportunity hasn't happened before. It's happening now. But the second part of it is somebody's got to take advantage of that opportunity. And I do think there's 2, maybe 3 schools in the Sun Belt Conference that are ideally suited to do that.
All right, I lied. There's actually one more question before the final get out question. Best road trip in the Sun Belt Conference. Everybody talks about going to, Penn State or to an Auburn or to an LSU. Not as many people travel to some of the smaller places for football. What's the best road trip in the Sun Belt?
Well, for me, the qualifier is restaurants. Is who has the best
restaurants. Like a broadcaster.
Yeah. We found out our schedule today. I promise you, my color analyst, Jerry Miller, has already done his due diligence. He knows not only, what the menus are in each of the places we're going to go, but he also probably has learned the servers' names so he can.
So that was my bus driver when I did minor league baseball. He had it all mapped out for us before we left town.
There's always that one guy in the group. I did minor league baseball, and usually it is the bus driver. But in terms of restaurants, and we don't go there this year. Louisiana Lafayette is not on the schedule this year. We might play him in the championship game, but Lafayette, Louisiana is restaurant heaven, if you ask me. I have it's tons of Cajun food, which I enjoy, tons of seafood, which I really enjoy. So in terms of that, it's really good. Once you get over the shock of realizing that at their football venue and at their basketball venue, the Cajun Dome, took me a while to realize this, but you can buy hard mixed drinks in there. It's the Le Bon Temps Roulette, they let the good times roll down there. It is a party place. They're famed. I love the road trips there because the fans there, if we have any, the fans there are famed for feeding you before the game and tailgating you and handing you your beverage of choice. But once inside, they'll call you anything except a child of God, I promise.
Well, next time you're in San Marcos, since it's close to me, I'll show you some Texas hospitality, and we'll get some places to eat down here for sure.
San Marcos is another great spot as well. I love that town. That's a good rejoinder because San Marcos is also excellent.
All right, the final question. It's our traditional get out question here on Friends of the Program. You've gotten home from a home game. You get a chance to maybe played early that happened today, and you got a chance to sit down in front of the TV for the night to watch the nighttime SEC game that's on. Right. What are you pouring at the house?
Well, I don't drink, so it's not. Yeah,
Fair enough.
It does not. It doesn't necessarily matter. Now, every once in a while, I got a buddy of mine who he's got a party deck out in the back. It's about 3 blocks down from the stadium. We'll go over there, and I might splurge. He's got some flavored seltzer water that I can't think of the name of. Every once in a while, I'll go do that. But the beer flows like wine with those fellas after the game. So I'll give him a shout out. His name is Gunner, and anybody who's a Troy fan who's ever been to a game, they know the legend of Gunner, believe me.
Yes.
Well, Barry, we appreciate the time and the insight to not only Troy football, but really the Sun Belt as a whole and Group of Five and the challenges that the Group of Five faces, but also the opportunity that the Group of Five will have this year. And I look forward to following up with watching games that I think most people don't usually get a chance to see or pay attention to early in the season. And trust me, folks, sit down and watch them. You will see.
You will have so much fun.
Good football when you watch those teams take the field.
I couldn't agree with you more. It is so much fun to broadcast as well. I have been blessed with the opportunity to be around it, to be around the student athletes is always my favorite part about the whole deal. And in the Sun Belt Conference, there's always going to be some fireworks. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, Barry McKnight, voice of the Troy Trojans, thanks so much for being a friend of the program. We'll talk again sometime down the road.
That sounds great. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you, Barry.
Our thanks again to Barry McKnight for joining us this week, voice of the Troy Trojans. Hopefully you got a little bit insight there on the challenges that Group of Five football is going to see this year, some insight on Troy, some insight on the Sun Belt. And Drew, I know you and I watch a lot of Sun Belt football, partially because a lot of SEC teams tend to schedule Sun Belt during for non-conference games, and we laugh and laugh and laugh when the SEC teams get upset. It hasn't happened to us yet. Yeah.
Close.
It's gotten close, but it hasn't happened yet. So when Troy beats LSU in a place that Auburn hasn't won in 20 years, it's funny but sad at the same time. It's always cool to see, Arkansas State go pull an upset. And we're from an area part of the country, quite frankly, where there's a lot of Sun Belt football to be had. But it's good football. I don't think people recognize because there's so much talent in this part of the country that not all of it can go to the SEC. And you're talking 3-star players that could start at an Illinois or that could start at a Washington State or wherever, decent middle-sized programs in big conferences that are choosing to go play in the Sun Belt because of the quality of competition, Drew.
And also don't forget that, you can, when I brought up ULM before we spoke to Barry, that's also a team that has beaten a couple of SEC schools, not just Arkansas a couple of years ago, which I guess now that's about 8 years ago, but beat Alabama.
Yeah. Saban's first year, I believe, right?
Exactly. You're exactly correct. And one of the most amazing post-game pressers I've ever heard.
I love that they put the billboard up in Tuscaloosa after the game.
Yes, that also happened. That also did happen, which is still one of the best power moves I've ever seen. But you're absolutely right. This is really good football. And this is not – the fun part to me about the Sun Belt is this is not your grandfather's Sun Belt. This isn't, school A versus school B, and, it's going to be a 45-34 game, and, let's just go home. No, this is really good football because you've now thrown in Georgia Southern, which, sure, they're up and down. They're still trying to find their way. But you've got Appalachian State, which was a 11-win ball team this past year,
and they should have beaten Penn State on the road. They blew that football game.
Absolutely, they did. So this, it's Appalachian State, it's Troy, it's Louisiana.
South Alabama's a rising program right there in Mobile, which is a recruiting hotbed down that way. It's a smaller version of a Houston to me. Nowhere near the population of Houston, but for the quality and amount of talent that comes out of Mobile, they're right there.
One of the things that both Alabama and Auburn are scared about, as far as the recruiting situation goes, is if South Alabama becomes a big program and starts sucking up not the 4 and the 5 stars, but those 3 stars that you were talking about.
It's not just Alabama and Auburn that recruit there. Florida State and LSU have big presences.
That's very true.
In Mobile. So it's when I tell you guys it's a battleground hotbed, because you would think, okay, it's in the state of Alabama, it's going to be one of those 2 schools in the state. It's closer to Florida State than it is to Alabama or to Auburn to get there from Mobile, and it's only a 3-hour drive over to Baton Rouge. It's not far.
It's a nothing drive to Baton Rouge.
Yeah. I've made that drive after a game before, because it was the only hotel we could get after Katrina was in Mobile. We couldn't find one in Louisiana in 2005. So it's a conference that it's in a recruiting gold mine. It's a conference that plays some good football. We haven't even talked about Georgia State. They literally turned a stadium that was the Braves played in just a couple of years ago, Turner Field. They've turned that into a football stadium. And
not just a football stadium, but a really nice football stadium.
Yeah, they're playing in a professional stadium.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, you can, if you've been to Turner Field before, you can definitely tell, this is what they did. But if you didn't know what the history of that building was, you would kind of go, wow, they did a really, it kind of looks a little bit funky, but wow, this is really, really nice.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I love the fact that Troy's going to play Middle Tennessee twice this year. That's an old rivalry that I think is going to be fun to see back this year. It's interesting that teams are having to play twice. I've only seen it recently with New Mexico State and Liberty. I think back-to-back years, the last couple of years, they played each other home and home within the same season because Liberty was trying to get their program going, and New Mexico State, I think, was independent at the time. It may still be, so they just couldn't find games. But the creative scheduling that's having to happen, but I really think it's going to be a chance for that conference, for the AAC, for the Conference USA, to get an opportunity to get extra eyeballs this year. And we encourage you folks, watch it, especially those first few weeks when no one else is out there playing ball. It's going to be something worth watching, and it's good football. If you haven't watched it, it's really good football.
There's no doubt about it. And I'm excited for those kids that they do have this opportunity, because they are, you know, we will, whenever the season really begins back about this week or next week, when the high schools are going on and the ESPN has their little medley of high school games that are throughout the day on a Saturday or a Friday. It's really cool for those kids. These guys have actually worked their tails off and really, really earned it to get this kind of exposure. So that's who I'm fired up for, that they're going to be able to show off. And especially for Troy, we talked about it with Barry just a moment ago. That BYU Troy game is something that I'm so fired up for Troy for.
And honestly, I think Troy gets the better end of the deal. Like
I do too.
They're going to BYU this year with restrictions on the stadium, but they're not having to get a return game, I think, for 5 or 6 years at Troy.
2026.
So when BYU comes back, we would pray to God that everything is back to normal by then, and they're going to have a packed out stadium with a name brand football team coming into Troy, Alabama. Like, that's a win for Troy all day long.
Even though I still think it's the most lucked into national championship in history. It's still a national championship program.
Yeah. Well, and if you paid attention, when big time programs go down there, they lose.
They take the L.
They lose. I believe, if I remember correctly, that Oklahoma State loss to Troy was the birth of the "I'm a man, I'm 40" rant.
I want to say you're right.
I think that was the game.
I know that it was either that game or the following game, but I know that the criticism for the quarterback came from the Troy game.
Yeah, and that's the coaching there. I mean, you already talked about Napier down in Louisiana. That is a rising coach who had offers this year, and he turned them down because he's waiting for better. He knows he can get more out of what he's got going down at University of Louisiana, and that's a good football team down in Lafayette.
Absolutely.
That's a real good football team in Lafayette.
Because I believe, didn't Napier turn down Florida State, if I remember correctly?
I think he did.
I know that was, I want to say that was.
He was on the radar. I know he was on the radar at Florida State. All right, folks. Well, the chance to walk through the schedule real quick. We'll have a more in-depth SEC conversation for an SEC preview the week before that schedule. We're going to start doing conference previews every week here as football gets to ramp up. Next week, we're going to talk Big 12, and we'll also hopefully be able to talk a little bit of Kentucky Derby with you next week as well, because like we said, Labor Day weekend will be coming up. A great chance to sit around with opening weekend of football for some smaller conferences and some gambling action in Louisville as well. So we'll have that for you coming your way, but the drinks are tapped. That means we're all done for the evening. Yep. And Drew, always fun, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Good talking with you.
Yes, sir. Don't forget, folks, you can follow us on the Twitter machine at FOT Podcast. That's at FOT Podcast. We post links, we post news, everything out there. Check us out there. You'll always have the latest drop when it comes out for new episodes. You can find us on YouTube at Friends of the Podcast. You can also find us on Instagram at FOT Podcast. If you go search as well, Friends of the Podcast, our Friends of the Program rather, on iTunes and Spotify. You can subscribe there and catch every time we drop a new episode, which is usually going to be on Mondays and Tuesdays every single week. So for Drew McCracken, I'm Brad Tillery. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time. Until then, keep the bourbon full and keep the bank accounts on the bets solid as well. Talk to you soon, folks.